Today we're going to use Photoshop to put graffiti onto a brick wall using a displacement layer. The first thing we need to do is create our displacement layer, which is actually a separate PSD file from our original brick wall photo. To do that, we'll open up the original brick wall photo and go to Image menu, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. Once the Hue and Saturation panel opens up, that little slider in the middle where it says saturation, we're going to knock that way down so that the picture becomes black and white. Once that's done, we'll click OK. And this is great. It's black and white, which is what we need for our displacement photo, but what we're going to need it to do is be much more contrasty than it is right now. So we'll go back to Image menu, go to Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast, and adjust the contrast slider until it's way up to 100 and our image becomes good and contrasty. Once we've done that, we want to save it as a PSD file and give it a different name. So go to File menu, Save As, change the format to Photoshop, and rename the file as Displacement. I've got a dedicated folder that I'm working in called Photoshop Graffiti. You should have a dedicated folder too, just because this is going to combine a bunch of different photo elements and it's helpful to keep them all in the same place. Once you've renamed your file and formatted it as a Photoshop file, click Save, and it'll put that into that file folder. Now that that's done, you can just leave that open in the background and you'll reopen your beautiful, pristine brick wall photo, which should be in your Photoshop Graffiti file. Once that's open, we're going to use Text Tool to create some text here that's going to take up most of your brick wall surface. I've chosen a font that I downloaded from DaFont called Gangbang Crime, just because it looks really good when I'm doing the graffiti demo. Just about anything that has a filled area, outline fonts really don't work for this at all. It has to have a filled solid surface. Anything that's big and chunky and has a solid filled area rather than an outline is going to work really well. So I've got this font called Gangbang Crime. The point size is going to have to be probably bumped up. I'll bump it up to 72 to start, but I'm probably going to have to make it even bigger or smaller. We'll see what happens. So you can type in your word. If I want to use, when I'm using this particular font, if I want to use, make the letters look drippy, it's got a really cool thing. If I type in all caps, I get drippy letters. Okay, it doesn't matter if it makes any sense. I'm going to change the color of the text to something that I think will work a little bit better. I always choose this lovely peacock blue color. And I'm going to go over here and just kind of use my up arrow to bump up the size in the font point size text box. If I don't feel like waiting for my arrow, I can just select what's in there and enter in a number. I entered 650 point. That's going to work well for this. Once I do that, I can drag things into place. I can also use warp text. Once I do that, I may need to create, adjust things differently. I'm going to choose arc. Wow, it's crazy, so I'm going to lower the arc down a little bit. and go back into my text tool. Open up my character panel and use the text width feature to reduce the size of the text down. Okay, better. Not quite behaving today. Okay, so I set the width of the text to 90%. I can knock that down to 85. That might work better. If it doesn't, I'll knock it down to 80. Everything's running in slow motion today. I'm also going to adjust the height of the letters. Okay, fits better. So once I've done that, I can always go back into warp text, warp it a wee bit more, and click OK. So now I'm ready to apply some layer styles to this. I can apply layer styles by double-clicking on the layer. To open up the layer styles panel, I'm just going to push it over here so I can see what I'm doing while I work. And the layer effects that I'm interested in applying to the lettering I've put in there so far are stroke, inner shadow, gradient overlay, and outer glow. I'm going to have to go into each one individually to adjust that particular style to make it look the way I want to. For stroke, I'm going to choose a light color. I'm also going to bump up the stroke size a little bit, and this will vary depending on which font you choose and how you position things and how big your initial file is. So I'm not going to shoot out numbers here. It'll really depend on what you choose. I don't have to put the position of the stroke on the inside of the letter. If I think it'll work, I can always put it on the outside. Might make everything look fatter. Next, I'm going to work on inner shadow. I don't want such a harsh shadow on the inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my blend mode to normal. And I'm going to bump up the distance a little bit and bump up the size. So you get that effect that you would normally get for spray paint. I've got my opacity set to 32%. That's kind of light, so I'm going to leave it that way. And next I'm going to move to gradient overlay. And nothing is set in stone. Once I do something, if I don't like the way something looks with whatever new layer style I've applied, I can always go back to any of these layer styles and mess around with them and change things until it looks the way I want to. So for gradient, I'm going to go through the gradients that are in here, and I'm going to find one that I think will work. If I choose one and I think it's yucky, I can do something differently. Pastels may not cut it. That might work better. These are all the gradients that are in there. If I don't feel like using any of them, I can always put a gradient in of my own. I can also change the angle of the gradient. And change it from a radial gradient to a linear gradient. I can also reduce the scale. And bump up the opacity. And like I said, if it looks, I think not terribly convincing, I can always go back in and change it to something different. If I think the opacity is too out of hand, I can bump that down. Maybe I'll leave that one up. Okay, so gradient is looking okay to me. My next task is outer glow. So for outer glow, I always try to choose a bright color for this. It looks better if I do. I'm going to leave the blend mode set to normal. I'm not going to play with the opacity until I change the color. For color, I'm going to choose an acid green type color. And it's really hard to see right now, even with the opacity way bumped up, because the spread and size are really, really low right now. So I'm going to bump up the spread and bump up the size. If I have the range and jitter bumped up like this, it's going to look very spray painty around the edges, which is how I want it to look. So that works out perfectly. So I might go back into stroke and knock the opacity down just a wee bit. And then if I think I've got things looking the way I want, I will click OK. I can always go back into layer styles after I've put in my displacement layer and kind of tweak and adjust as I need to. So I'm not going to freak out yet. What I need to do, though, the next task is going to be putting in my displacement layer, but I can't do that until after I convert this to a smart object. So I can either do that from filter menu by going to convert for smart filters, and it'll ask me if I want to convert this to a smart object, or I can just go into the layer and right click it and convert to smart object. Either way is fine. It'll change it to a smart object. Once it does that, all my fun things that I just applied are things that become secretly invisible. But now I can apply my displacement image that I created before. So to do that, I will go to Filter menu and Distort, Displace. Okay, I'm going to leave the horizontal scale. Actually, let's set the horizontal scale to 5 and the vertical scale to 5. I'm going to leave these set the way they are. Stretch to fit is fine. Repeat edge pixels is just fine. I don't want to touch those, so I'm going to click OK and choose my displacement PSD that I made. And once I do that, you'll see like the edges of it get all rough because you can sort of see what that photo is going to do. Basically, it's going to act as a texturizer, and the texture of the brick wall is going to come through and sort of be kind of visible. We got to adjust that and play with it. So I'm going to double click on my layer again, and here's where the magic comes in. I might go back in later and change the opacity of the whole layer. I can do that here from blending options. Or I can use these lovely things down on the bottom. Blend if is a great thing. If I adjust these, it's going to make stuff disappear. This is the one I'm interested in. These sliders are going to make the bricks come through. If I hold down my Option key, I can move the sliders independently. And make this look a little bit more realistic. Very much like it's been painted onto the brick wall. So again, whatever it takes to make it look more believable, more realistic, that is what you're going to do. And when you get it looking the way you want it, you can just click OK, and there you go. You are done. You've got graffiti on a brick wall.